The strangest part wasn't that the house was empty. It was that Riley still tried to be quiet when he walked in. Like some part of him still thought Rebecca might be asleep upstairs with the baby, even after everything he'd done that night. He actually took his shoes off by the door. That's the kind of detail that stayed with me when I first heard this story. Not the cheating, not even the fact that he'd spent the whole night with another woman, while his wife was home alone with a newborn. It was that tiny reflex. Him trying not to wake a family he'd already been drifting away from for months without admitting it to himself. He said the silence hit him first. Not regular silence either. Not the kind you get at 3 in the morning when everybody's sleeping. This felt different. Like the house had already accepted he didn't belong there anymore. He kept calling her name while walking through rooms that didn't sound right anymore. And the deeper he got into the house, the more he realized this wasn't some emotional stunt. This wasn't Rebecca trying to scare him or teach him a lesson. She was gone. Baby gone too. Furniture missing. Pictures off the walls. And sitting on the kitchen counter was a folder with his name written on it in neat handwriting, like she'd prepared it hours earlier. Inside was paperwork showing she'd sold the house. That's when he finally understood something most people realize too late. Big endings usually don't happen all at once. Most of the time, people leave you slowly, while they're still standing right beside you. Welcome to Mr. Kingswell Stories, where powerful life lessons come through unforgettable stories about love, betrayal, family, and second chances. If you're new here, subscribe and join us for more stories that make you think differently about life. And before we begin, tell me in the comments what time it is and where you're watching from. Now the crazy part is, Riley kept telling everybody he lost his marriage in one night, but Rebecca would have told you it happened in pieces. Riley stood in the kitchen staring at the folder, like if he waited long enough, the house would explain itself. The refrigerator hummed behind him. That was the loudest thing in the room. A few hours earlier, he'd been in a hotel room near the airport, pretending he still had control over his life. Music low, ice melting in a plastic cup. Kiara laughing at something he barely remembered saying. Now he couldn't stop staring at the empty space where his daughter's play mat used to be. He finally reached for the folder. His hands looked strange, shaky, not drunk shaky, something else. Inside were papers, clipped together with color tabs. That was Rebecca all over. Even leaving him looked organized. The first page was a copy of a finalized property transfer. He blinked at it twice before the words settled properly in his head. Settlement complete. Recorded. The address underneath was theirs, or had been. No, he muttered automatically, like paperwork could hear him and apologize. He flipped pages faster. There was a letter from an attorney. Clean wording, cold without sounding angry. Future communication regarding property division, custody arrangements, and financial matters would proceed through counsel. There were copies of bank statements too, highlighted charges, hotel bars, restaurants, ride shares, jewelry store purchases he barely remembered making. One line after another, like somebody had quietly translated his entire affair into a language a courtroom could understand. Riley swallowed hard. His mouth tasted sour. He looked around the kitchen again. The magnets were gone from the refrigerator. That hit him weirdly hard. Little stupid things. A pediatric appointment card. A church fish fry flyer her mother kept insisting they attend. One blurry ultrasound picture Rebecca had stuck up there with a blue magnet shaped like Pennsylvania. Gone. The counter where the bottle sanitizer used to sit looked pale from where sunlight hadn't touched it in months. He walked into the living room again, slow this time, like maybe he'd missed something. The carpet still had square dents where the couch used to be. That was the thing about emptied houses. They still remembered where everything had been. Riley rubbed both hands over his face. Rebecca, he said again, quieter now. No answer. Of course no answer. His phone buzzed. Kiara. He declined it immediately. Then he opened his call log and hit Rebecca's number again. The call went straight to voicemail. Rebecca, pick up. His voice sounded different already. Thinner. I'm home now. Silence. He walked toward the stairs while the voicemail recording beeped in his ear. I don't know what this is supposed to be. That sounded stupid the second it left his mouth. He stopped halfway upstairs. The hallway smelled wrong. Not dirty, not clean either. Just empty. like air trapped inside cardboard boxes. The nursery door was open. Riley stared into the room. The crib was gone. The rocking chair, too. Only the pale rectangle on the wall remained where Rebecca had hung those little moon and stars decals above the changing table. He stepped inside, slowly. The room echoed now. A few hours earlier, his daughter had probably still been here, sleeping, crying, breathing. Now there was nothing. He sat down on the floor without meaning to, just folded there. His chest suddenly tightened hard enough to scare him. Not pain exactly, pressure, like his lungs had shrunk. He loosened his collar, took a breath. Another one, too fast. Jesus Christ. He pressed both palms against his knees. The room tilted slightly. He tried focusing on details. Baseboards, window latch, dust near the outlet. But his thoughts kept jumping. Where did she go? Who helped her? How long had she planned this? His phone slipped from his hand onto the nursery floor. The sound cracked through the room sharply, and suddenly another thought hit him. The baby. He grabbed the phone again and dialed immediately. Still voicemail. This time, he paced while it rang. Rebecca, call me back. Pause. Please just tell me where my daughter is. The words came out harsher than he intended. He stopped walking, closed his eyes, tried again. Look, I know you're mad. Mad. Even now he called it that. Like this was a fight. Like she'd gone to her mother's for the night and not dismantled his entire life in silence. I'm coming to talk to you, all right? Just answer the phone. Nothing. He hung up harder than necessary, then immediately called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. By the fourth call, his voice started changing from anger into something closer to panic. Rebecca, stop playing with me. By the sixth, I'm serious. Pick up. By the eighth call, he stopped leaving messages entirely. The house felt colder now. Or maybe dawn was coming. Gray light slowly pushed through the nursery blinds. Riley stood at the window, looking down at the street. Trash trucks somewhere in the distance. A SEPTA bus groaning at the corner. Somebody jogging with headphones on like the world hadn't just ended inside this house. Then his phone buzzed again. Another alert. Insufficient funds. He frowned instantly. That made no sense. There should have been money. Commission check had hit 3 days ago. Unless... Riley opened his banking app. Loading, loading. Then finally, access restricted. Please contact account administrator. He stared at the screen, read it twice, then a third time slower. For the first time since walking into the house, something inside him truly began to unravel. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a rope finally giving way strand by strand. And standing there in his daughter's empty nursery, with dawn creeping into a room that no longer belonged to him, Riley realized something he should have noticed months ago. Rebecca hadn't left in anger. Anger was loud. This had taken planning. By 7:30 that morning, Riley had driven past Rebecca's mother's block 3 times without getting out of the car. West Philly looked damp and gray under the leftover drizzle from overnight. Corner stores lifting their gates. Church women sweeping stoops. SEPTA buses hissing at curbs while people climbed on carrying coffee in tired faces. Normal life. That part kept irritating him. How could everything still look normal? He parked half a block away, beneath a sycamore tree, shedding bark onto the windshield. Mrs. Elaine Thomas's row house sat exactly where it always had. Cream-colored steps. Flower pots already out even though spring hadn't fully settled in yet. Her car was there, a silver Buick, with a dent near the back bumper from 2 Thanksgivings ago. Riley stared at it. Then, at the front curtains, one twitch of fabric, and his stomach tightened immediately. He suddenly pictured Rebecca inside, holding the baby, while her mother watched him from behind the blinds, like some man on the evening news. He stayed in the driver's seat, engine running, phone in his hand. Still no response. He typed out a text. This is insane, Rebecca. Deleted it. Tried again. We need to talk like adults. Deleted that too. Finally. Please call me. He sent it, and immediately hated the word please sitting there. His chest still felt tight from earlier. Not full panic anymore. Just this low electrical feeling under his skin that wouldn't settle. A delivery truck honked somewhere behind him. Riley drove off before anybody could walk outside and see him sitting there. The city blurred past in pieces after that. Baltimore Avenue. Traffic near University City. Construction cones squeezing lanes down near the Schuylkill. His mind kept snagging on stupid details. The baby's socks still being in the dryer yesterday morning. Rebecca asking if he could pick up diaper cream on the way home. The way she'd barely looked up from her phone when he left for client drinks. At the time, he'd actually felt annoyed she wasn't asking more questions. Now he wondered if she already knew everything. His gas light blinked near Gray's Ferry. Jesus Christ. He pulled into a Sunoco station beside an auto body shop. A man in paint-splattered work pants smoked beside the air pump while Spanish music rattled from somewhere nearby. Riley slid his card into the reader. Declined. He frowned. Did it again slower. Declined. Come on. He checked the zip code, entered it carefully. Declined again. The cashier inside glanced up through the glass. Riley could feel heat climbing his neck. He grabbed another card from his wallet. This one worked for exactly 4 seconds before the screen flashed. Transaction denied. The cashier pushed the microphone button. You got another form of payment? Riley stared at him blankly, then finally dug crumpled cash from his center console, mostly 20s and singles shoved beside old receipts and charging cords. Enough for half a tank, barely. As the gas pumped, he leaned against the car, staring at the numbers climb slowly. Something about paying cash made everything feel suddenly real in a way paperwork hadn't yet. Rebecca had changed things already, not emotionally, practically. That was worse, because emotional people make mistakes. Practical people finish things. His phone buzzed again. Another overdraft alert. Then another. Riley opened his banking app while standing beside pump 6. Half the accounts were inaccessible now. The joint savings was nearly empty, except for scheduled bill payments, still pending. He scrolled faster. Utility withdrawals, insurance payments, mortgage payoff processing, mortgage payoff. His stomach dropped. That's when it finally clicked. The sale money hadn't just disappeared. Debts had been handled first. Everything organized, structured. She'd been preparing this while he was still sneaking around pretending he was smarter than everybody. Riley leaned both hands against the roof of the car. A memory surfaced hard enough to stop him cold. 3 months earlier, Sunday night, Rebecca sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with folders spread around her while the baby slept against her chest. You ever think about how crazy it is that nobody teaches us this stuff? She'd said quietly. He barely looked up from his phone. What stuff? Life stuff. Like insurance, wills, emergency contacts. You should know where all this is too. I trust you. At the time he'd meant it like a compliment. Now standing at a gas station with declining cards and $42 left in cash, he realized what he'd actually been saying. Handle it for me. A pickup truck pulled beside him, blasting sports radio. Riley suddenly felt exhausted, not sleepy, stripped, like somebody had peeled his life down to the studs overnight. He got back into the car and tried calling Rebecca again, straight to voicemail. This time, he didn't speak immediately after the beep. When he finally did, his voice sounded smaller. Rebecca, just tell me the baby's okay. Silence filled the line. I'm not trying to fight. That part wasn't fully true. There was anger under everything now, hot and rising. But underneath the anger was something worse growing quietly. Confusion. Because the more he thought about the house, the paperwork, the accounts, the more impossible it became to ignore one humiliating fact. He had no idea how their actual life worked. Not really. He knew his commission numbers. He knew client birthdays. He knew hotel reward passwords. But he didn't know what pediatrician they used without checking his phone when the property taxes were due, where Rebecca kept important documents, how much daycare waitlists cost, what account paid which bill, or how long she'd been preparing to leave him. And sitting there in traffic near the Schuylkill Expressway while morning commuters crawled past with coffee cups and dead-eyed exhaustion, Riley realized something that frightened him almost as much as the empty house. Rebecca had been surviving him for a long time before she finally disappeared. Riley waited almost 20 minutes before calling Kiara, not because he didn't want to, because he did. Too much. He sat in his car outside a strip mall pharmacy near South Philly, watching people move in and out with prescription bags and iced coffees, while his phone rested heavy in his hand. Part of him already knew this was a bad idea, but another part The louder part. Needed somebody to tell him he wasn't completely alone yet. Kiara answered on the fourth ring. "Hey," she said softly. Background noise. Television, maybe. Riley swallowed. "Hey!" A pause stretched too long. "You okay?" she asked, though it sounded more polite than concerned. Riley rubbed his forehead hard. "Not really." "What happened?" He looked through the windshield at nothing. "She left." Another pause. "Rebecca?" "Yeah." "Oh, just that." "Oh." Not shock, not sympathy, just mild inconvenience entering the room. Riley sat up straighter automatically. "She took the baby too." "That's wow." He waited for more. None came. Traffic hissed past outside. Finally, Kiara sighed softly into the phone. "Did she know about us?" Riley laughed once under his breath. Sharp, humorless, pretty sure she knew about everything. Kiara didn't answer right away. Then, "So what are you gonna do?" The question irritated him instantly. "What do you mean, what am I gonna do?" "I mean," she lowered her voice, "are you guys done? Or is this one of those situations where she just needs space?" Riley looked down at the legal folder still sitting on the passenger seat beside him. Settlement papers, attorney letter, account restrictions, the emptiness of the nursery. "She sold the house," he said finally. Kiara went quiet. Like truly quiet this time. "You serious?" "Yeah." "How the hell she do that?" "I don't know." But even saying it, he realized he probably should have known. That irritated him more. Kiara exhaled slowly. "Well," Riley hated the sound of that word immediately. "Well, what?" "Well, maybe you should let everybody cool down first." Everybody, not us, not we, everybody. Distance had entered her voice already. Riley felt it happen in real time, like watching somebody slowly lock a door while still smiling at you through the glass. "Can I come over?" he asked. Another pause. Too long again. Yeah, I guess. By the time he reached Kiara's apartment building in Northern Liberties, rain had started again, thin and cold. He parked beside the curb and sat there staring at the glowing windows above him. Normally when he came here, he felt lighter before even walking inside. Desired, wanted, like he was stepping briefly into a version of himself untouched by bills and exhaustion and pediatric appointments. Tonight the building just looked expensive, temporary. Kiara opened the door wearing leggings and one of those oversized hoodies women wore when they wanted comfort more than attention. She hugged him quickly but without really settling into him. "You look terrible," she said. "Thanks. I didn't mean..." "No, I know." Her apartment smelled like vanilla candles and takeout noodles. Riley dropped onto the couch while Kiara moved around the kitchen island, pretending to straighten things that already looked straight. "You want wine or something?" "No." "You eaten?" He shook his head. She nodded without reacting much, not nurturing him, not really touching him either. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Usually, Kiara liked drama in controlled amounts. It made her feel important. But this was real-life collapse. Different thing entirely. Riley looked around the apartment while she disappeared briefly down the hallway. That's when he noticed the hoodie draped over the dining chair. Men's hoodie. Gray Nike one. Definitely not his. Too big for Kiara, too. He stared at it longer than necessary. When she came back, he nodded toward it casually. "You got company now?" Kiara followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Marcus's." "Marcus?" "My cousin." The answer came too fast. Riley looked at her. Kiara crossed her arms instantly. "What?" "Nothing." "You're really doing that right now?" I said nothing. She laughed once under her breath. Not kindly. "You spent the night cheating on your wife, and now you want to interrogate me over a sweatshirt?" "That's not what I..." "No, actually, that is exactly what you're doing." Riley leaned back slowly. The room suddenly felt smaller. Kiara shook her head and grabbed her wineglass off the counter. "I'm not trying to be rude, Riley, but your whole situation is messy as hell right now." Messy. The word hit him harder than it should have, because messy wasn't tragic. Messy wasn't meaningful. Messy was disposable. He looked at her carefully then, really looked, and for the first time since this thing started months ago, he saw something uncomfortable underneath all the flirting and hotel bars and late-night texts. Kiara had never actually asked him to leave his wife. never talked about a future, never wanted mornings, just attention, just escape. And suddenly, he understood something deeply humiliating. He had risked his marriage for a relationship that only worked as long as it stayed unreal. Kiara sat beside him finally, softer now. "I'm sorry, okay?" Riley nodded once, but he barely heard her anymore, because another realization had already arrived behind the first one. Rebecca had built a real life with him. Bills, family, schedules, history, a child. Meanwhile, he'd nearly blown everything apart for somebody who was already emotionally stepping away the second consequences showed up. Around 2 a.m, Kiara fell asleep, facing the opposite side of the bed. Riley stared at the ceiling, listening to traffic outside and somebody arguing faintly in the street below. At 4:30, he quietly got dressed. Kiara didn't wake up, or pretended not to. By 5:15, he was sitting alone in his car outside a Wawa near Columbus Boulevard, holding burnt coffee between both hands while dawn slowly crawled across the Delaware River. Construction workers moved in and out under fluorescent lights. A tired mother dragged 2 sleepy kids toward the entrance. Normal people, normal lives. Riley looked at his reflection in the windshield. Wrinkled shirt, bloodshot eyes, phone full of unanswered messages. And somewhere between the empty house, the declined cards, and the silence beside him in Kiara's bed, the fantasy he'd been living inside finally began collapsing under its own weight. Not because Rebecca left, because for the first time, he was starting to understand why she did. The first time Riley met Rebecca, she was arguing with a printer. Not loudly. That wasn't her style. She stood in the back corner of a classroom at Community College of Philadelphia, one hand on her hip, the other tapping the side of the machine like she was trying to reason with a stubborn child. "Come on now," she said under her breath. "Don't embarrass me in front of these people." Riley heard it from 2 desks away and laughed before he meant to. Rebecca turned around, not smiling, just looking. He lifted both hands a little. "Sorry, I've said worse to printers." She studied him for half a second, then looked back at the blinking error light. This one got a spirit on it. That made him laugh again. The class was some evening certificate course neither of them really wanted to be in, but both needed. Project management basics, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8:45. Half the students came straight from work with coffee breath, wrinkled shirts, and that quiet adult exhaustion nobody talked about. Rebecca was there because her supervisor at the hospital kept dangling a better position in front of her like a carrot. Patient access lid, more responsibility, slightly better pay, and just enough authority to get blamed when systems broke. Riley was there because his company would reimburse the course if he passed, and his manager had started using words like growth track and territory leadership in meetings. That first night, neither of them came looking for anything soft. They came with notebooks, unpaid bills, and the kind of tiredness that made flirting feel almost childish. Still, he noticed her. Not in some dramatic way. He noticed how she labeled her folder before class started, how she read the syllabus all the way through while everyone else skimmed, how she asked one question that made the instructor pause and say, "That's actually a good point." Rebecca noticed him too, though she would deny it later. He was the man in the second row who acted confident until the Excel sheet opened. Then his face changed, not panic exactly, more like betrayal. When the instructor told everyone to pair up for an assignment, Riley looked down at his screen, then over at Rebecca's. She didn't look up. "No," she said. He blinked. "I didn't say anything. You were about to. You were about to ask if I knew how to do formulas." He smiled despite himself. "Do you?" She finally looked at him. "I do." Then I was definitely about to ask. She held the stare for one more second, then slid her chair over with a sigh. "Don't touch my keyboard." That was how it started, not romance. A spreadsheet. He made jokes when he got uncomfortable. She ignored half of them and laughed at the ones that slipped through before she could stop herself. He typed too fast and made careless mistakes. She caught them without making him feel stupid. "Well, most of the time." "Riley," she said once, pointing at the screen, "you cannot just vibe your way through a budget. I've built a whole career doing exactly that. I believe you." That's what scares me. He liked that she didn't perform sweetness. She liked that he didn't get offended every time she corrected him. Outside, Philadelphia moved through early fall in that restless way it had. Students smoking by the entrance, delivery bikes cutting around buses, sirens somewhere distant but familiar, food trucks still open near Spring Garden, steam rising into the streetlights. After the third week, they started walking out together, not on purpose at first, just the same pace, same direction for 2 blocks. He parked near a meter because he never learned from tickets. She took the bus because parking downtown annoyed her more than SEPTA ever could. One Thursday, rain came down hard enough to flood the curb. Riley stood under the awning with his laptop bag over one shoulder, watching Rebecca dig through her purse. "No umbrella?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I had one." "What happened to it?" "Somebody at work borrowed it." He smiled. "That means it's gone. That means she better bring it back." Thunder cracked above Broad Street. They both looked out at the rain. Then Riley took off his jacket and held it over both of them. Rebecca glanced at him. "I'm not running through rain under a man's jacket like this is a music video. I wasn't gonna make it romantic. You already made it weird." But she stepped under it anyway. They ran half a block laughing harder than the situation deserved. His dress shoe slipped once, and she grabbed his arm before he fell into the curb water. "See?" he said, breathless. "Teamwork. You almost died outside a CVS." "But I didn't." At the bus stop, they stood too close because of the rain. Neither of them said anything for a minute. Then Riley looked at her and said, "Can I buy you dinner sometime?" Somewhere with no spreadsheets. Rebecca wiped rain from her cheek with the back of her hand. "You ask every woman who saves your fake budget." "No, just the mean ones." She wanted not to smile. Failed. "Dinner," she said. "Not drinks. Not your apartment. Dinner." "Yes, ma'am. And don't pick someplace where the menu got foam on it." "I don't even know what that means." "Good." Their first dinner was at a small West Philly spot, where Rebecca knew the owner's niece and Riley tried too hard not to seem out of place. He asked what was good on the menu, then actually listened when she told him. That mattered to her. More than flowers would have. He didn't pretend to understand everything about her world. Not then. He asked questions, sometimes awkward ones, sometimes ones that made her tilt her head and say, "You really never had to think about that, huh?" And he would get quiet, not defensive. Quiet. That mattered too. Riley liked the way Rebecca looked at life like something that needed handling, but could still surprise you. She liked that he could make a bad day loosen its grip without trying to fix everything. For a while, that was enough. 2 adults, tired from work, meeting twice a week in a classroom that smelled like dry erase markers and old coffee, slowly deciding that maybe life had not finished offering them something decent. Years later, sitting alone outside that Wawa with cold coffee in his hands, Riley would remember the printer first. Not the wedding, not the baby, not even the house. The printer. Rebecca tapping the side of it, patient but annoyed, refusing to let a broken thing make her look foolish. And for reasons he could not explain, that memory hurt worse than almost anything else. Because back then, when something didn't work, she still believed it could be fixed. The first time Riley met Rebecca's family, somebody handed him a folding chair before they handed him a plate. That was how he knew he was being evaluated. Not by questions, by usefulness. The cookout was in Southwest Philly, at her aunt's row house near Kingswell. August heat, music floating through open windows, smoke from the grill curling over the alley behind the house, while kids ran through water from a leaking hose. Riley showed up carrying 2 bags of ice, like Rebecca told him to. "You're early," she said, opening the screen door. "You said 2 o'clock. It's 1:30. He frowned. "That's early? In my family." "Yeah." Inside, somebody yelled from the kitchen, "He cute," in a confused kind of way. Riley froze. Rebecca barely reacted. "Don't take nothing personal today," she muttered. "These people treat love like a contact sport." He laughed, nervously. By 3 o'clock he'd been interrogated by 3 aunties, challenged to dominoes by 2 cousins, and publicly corrected by a church mother named Miss Celeste for standing too close to the grill without actually helping. "You just supervising smoke?" she asked. Everybody laughed, even Rebecca, especially Rebecca. But later, when the folding tables needed moving because rain clouds rolled in suddenly, Riley grabbed one side without being asked. That changed something. Not everything, but something. Older black women noticed men through behavior more than charm. Rebecca had told him that once. Anybody could smile. Useful was harder. That evening, sitting on the back steps eating peach cobbler from a paper bowl, Riley looked over at Rebecca while music drifted from somebody's Bluetooth speaker inside. "You know your family been roasting me for 6 straight hours? They like you. This is liking me." She shrugged. "If they hated you, you'd know." The warmth between them built slowly after that. Not dramatic, not cinematic, adult. She started leaving a toothbrush at his apartment in Roxborough. He started keeping ginger ale in his fridge because Rebecca always wanted it after long shifts. On Sundays, they wandered through neighborhood festivals, farmers markets, block parties. Sometimes they argued lightly in grocery stores about prices like they'd already been together 10 years. Riley liked making her laugh in public because Rebecca tried so hard not to. One winter night, they got stuck assembling cheap IKEA shelves in his apartment while snow came down outside. "You skipped step 4, Rebecca said immediately. "There is no step 4. She held up the manual silently. "There was absolutely a step 4. "You know," Riley muttered, "you got a very judgmental spirit. You built this backwards. But structurally, we're close." "We are not close." They ended up sitting on the floor, eating Chinese takeout beside half-built furniture, while the radiator knocked loudly through the apartment. That was the thing about them in the beginning. Nothing felt performed. No grand speeches, no perfect timing. Just two people slowly building habits around each other. When Rebecca first brought him to church, he sweated through his button-down shirt before service even started. "You nervous?" She whispered. "Everybody here looks like they know each other." "They do. That's horrifying." She covered her laugh with a cough. But afterward, older women pressed food into his hands like they'd known him for years. "Baby, you too skinny. I'm not. Take the macaroni." He took the macaroni. At Christmas, Rebecca came to his mother's house in Delaware County wearing a sweater his sister immediately called aggressively festive. The Moran family loved quietly. Noisy emotions made them uncomfortable. Her family hugged when they entered rooms. His family offered drinks and insulted each other affectionately from across furniture. Still, Rebecca adapted. She helped his mother in the kitchen without acting performative about it, remembered everybody's names, sat beside his uncle during football, and listened to stories she'd already heard twice. Driving home afterward, Riley reached across the center console and squeezed her knee. "You survived. I think your family communicates through sarcasm and baked goods. That's basically accurate." She smiled softly out the passenger window. "I like your mom." "Yeah?" "She watches people carefully." Riley laughed quietly. "That means she likes you, too." Years passed like that. Not perfectly, but solidly. When Rebecca's grandmother died, Riley stayed at the house until nearly 3 in the morning, helping cousins move folding chairs and leftover food trays into cars while grief drifted room to room. Later, Rebecca sat beside him on her mother's porch in silence. "You didn't have to stay all day," she said. He looked over at her. Where else was I supposed to be? That was the version of him she married. The one who showed up. The house came later. Small 2-story place in West Philadelphia with narrow stairs and outdated cabinets and a basement that smelled faintly like old paint no matter what they did. Rebecca's grandmother had helped with the down payment years earlier before she got sick. The deed stayed in Rebecca's name, not because they planned for disaster, because older black women who survived housing discrimination treated ownership like sacred ground. Riley understood that intellectually, but over time, emotionally, he stopped noticing the distinction. They painted the walls themselves to save money, argued over cabinet colors at Home Depot, used tax refunds for upgrades one careful piece at a time. One year the dishwasher, another year new windows, another year finally fixing the back steps that leaned slightly left. There were nights they sat on the kitchen floor exhausted after painting, while cheesesteaks cooled beside them. "Think we're adults now?" Riley asked once. Rebecca looked around at the paint trays. "No, me neither." But they were. That was the dangerous part. Adulthood had arrived quietly while they were busy building routines around each other, and somewhere inside those routines, something even riskier had formed. Trust, the kind built slowly enough that neither person notices how much of themselves they've handed over until years later. When one of them finally walks away, holding most of the life they built together. The fertility clinic sat inside a medical building near Center City, with soft instrumental music playing too quietly through ceiling speakers. Everything about the place felt carefully designed not to upset people. Warm lighting, neutral paint, fake plants. Even the receptionist spoke in a voice that sounded pre-softened. Rebecca hated it immediately. Not because anybody was rude, because everybody was trying too hard not to say what the building was actually for. Loss, waiting, fear. She sat beside Riley, flipping through intake paperwork, while women in expensive sweaters and tired eyes stared into their phones around them. "You finish your side?" she asked quietly. Riley nodded without looking up. He hadn't. She could tell. Half his forms were still blank. Medical history untouched. Family background skipped entirely. "Riley, I got it." "You don't got it." "I said I got it." The sharpness in his voice made the older couple across from them glance over briefly. Riley immediately looked embarrassed afterward. Not apologetic. Embarrassed. "Different thing." Rebecca lowered her voice. "I'm just trying to help." "I know." But he still didn't finish the paperwork until 10 minutes later, when the receptionist called his name again. That became the rhythm of fertility treatment. Rebecca moving toward the problem. Riley moving around it. At first, he tried. That was the painful part. He downloaded the clinic app, came to appointments, made jokes in waiting rooms. Crazy how they can put a man on the moon but still make hospital coffee taste like drywall. Rebecca laughed because she knew he needed her to. But little cracks started showing early. He postponed blood work twice because of client meetings, forgot portal passwords, missed follow-up calls, left paperwork sitting unopened on the kitchen counter until Rebecca quietly completed half of it herself. One night, she found him sitting in the dark living room, staring at ESPN, with the volume muted. "You didn't eat?" she asked. "Nah." She stood there, holding 2 bowls of leftover pasta. "You want to talk about today?" Riley rubbed both hands over his face. "There's nothing to talk about." "That's not true. They said we need more testing. They said we need more information." "Same thing." Rebecca sat beside him carefully. The couch springs creaked. For a minute, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "It's not anybody's fault." Riley laughed once under his breath. "You don't know that." She turned toward him. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged, without looking at her. Nothing. But she knew what he meant. He already felt blamed, not by her, by his own body. That was when shame entered the marriage for real, not loudly, quietly, like moisture inside walls. Months passed. Ovulation schedules taped invisibly onto their lives. Medication alarms, insurance fights, blood draws before work. Rebecca reading fertility forums at 2 a.m, while Riley pretended not to notice. At the hospital, she became excellent at acting normal. "Morning, girl. Morning. You surviving?" "Barely." Everybody laughed. Meanwhile, she had injection bruises hidden under scrubs. One afternoon, Rebecca sat in her car outside the clinic rereading test results while rain tapped lightly against the windshield. Male factor. Infertility likely. Further evaluation recommended. Clinical language. Cold language. But she understood it immediately. Riley probably did too. That was why he kept avoiding follow-ups. That night, she found him cleaning the grill in the backyard, even though it was November and already dark outside. "You trying to freeze to death?" Riley kept scrubbing. "This thing filthy. It's 38 degrees. Rebecca stood in the doorway watching him. "You got the message from the clinic?" "Yeah." And what?" She felt irritation rise instantly. "And did you read it?" "Basically." "What does basically mean?" Riley finally looked at her then. Tired. Defensive. "It means I'm sick of feeling like a damn science project every week." Rebecca folded her arms against the cold. "We're both doing this." "No," he snapped suddenly. "You're handling it. I'm getting evaluated." The words hung there. Even he looked startled after saying them. Rebecca stared at him quietly. "That's what this is to you." Riley looked away first. "No." But again, different from sorry. Inside, the microwave beeped. Neither moved. Eventually, Rebecca spoke softer. "We said we wanted a family." "I know. Then we gotta actually stay in this together." Riley nodded, but the nod looked exhausted. Not committed. That frightened her more than anger would have. Weeks later, the doctor finally said the word donor during a consultation. Not casually, carefully, like setting down glass. The office smelled faintly like disinfectant. And coffee. Rebecca listened closely while Riley stared at the floor. The doctor explained options, statistics, procedures, language softened by professionalism. When they got back to the parking garage, Riley sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel without starting the car. People moved past outside carrying umbrellas and hospital bags. Life continuing. He suddenly laughed once. Short, humorless. "My dad's gonna love this." Rebecca looked at him carefully. "What does your dad have to do with anything?" Riley shook his head. "You wouldn't get it." "Then explain it." He looked out through the windshield. "Men don't." He stopped, started again. "Where I'm from, men don't talk about stuff like this. Stuff like infertility." He flinched slightly at the word itself. That told her everything. Rebecca reached for his hand slowly. "Riley." He let her hold it. "Barely. What if this still gets us where we're trying to go?" she asked quietly. He stayed silent a long time. Then finally, "If that's what gets us a family, then okay." Rebecca nodded slowly. Relief mixed strangely with grief inside her chest. Because his words said yes, but his face looked gone already. And over the next several months, that distance only deepened. He still came home, still kissed her forehead sometimes, still paid bills and talked about work and carried groceries inside, but emotionally, pieces of him kept disappearing. He stopped asking questions during appointments, stopped talking about names for future babies, stopped touching Rebecca with the same ease. One night, she woke up around 3 a.m. and found him sitting alone downstairs, lit only by the refrigerator light. "You okay?" she whispered sleepily. Riley looked up like she'd caught him doing something shameful. "Yeah, you coming to bed?" "In a minute." Rebecca stood there watching him. The man she loved looked exhausted, smaller somehow, like something inside him had started collapsing inward where nobody could reach it. And standing barefoot in the kitchen with one hand resting unconsciously against the counter for balance, Rebecca felt the first real flicker of fear that love might not be enough to carry 2 people through shame if only one of them was willing to face it. The baby arrived on a Tuesday morning, while rain hit the hospital windows hard enough to blur the skyline. Rebecca remembered that part clearly afterward. Not the pain first, not even the fear. The rain, gray sheets of it sliding down the glass, while nurses moved calmly around the room, like people who had seen every version of panic already. Riley cried when their daughter was born. Actually cried. Rebecca saw it happen, while exhaustion rolled through her body in waves. He stood beside the hospital bed, staring down at the baby wrapped in striped blankets, both hands trembling slightly against the railing. "Oh my God," he whispered, over and over. "Oh my God." For a little while, everything soft inside their marriage came back. Riley texted pictures to everybody, held the baby carefully, like she might dissolve in his hands, slept awkwardly in the hospital chair with his neck bent sideways and one arm hanging toward the floor. When Rebecca woke during the night, she'd find him staring into the bassinet sometimes, quiet, almost stunned. That version of him made her hopeful again. Maybe all the other distance had just been fear. Maybe becoming parents would pull them back toward each other. But real life arrived quickly after that. Too quickly. The first week home disappeared inside diapers, breast pumps, cold coffee, and exhaustion so deep it stopped feeling temporary. Their house changed temperature constantly because somebody was always awake. Night light glow in the hallway, bottles warming at 3 a.m, tiny cries crackling through the baby monitor. Laundry piled on dining chairs because neither of them had enough energy to fold it anymore. Rebecca moved through the days half-healed physically and completely untethered emotionally. Her body still hurt. Nobody really warned women honestly about that part. The bleeding, the soreness, the strange feeling of looking down at yourself afterward and realizing your body no longer entirely belonged to you. Meanwhile, everybody else just kept saying, "She's beautiful. You must be so happy. Enjoy every moment." Rebecca wanted to sleep for 14 straight hours and cry in silence sometimes. Instead, she learned how to balance a bottle one-handed while answering pediatric portal messages. Riley helped. That was the confusing part. He wasn't useless. He changed diapers, ran to Target at midnight for wipes, heated food for her without being asked. But emotionally, he kept drifting in and out of the room. Sometimes she'd look at him holding their daughter and feel warmth rise in her chest so fast it scared her. Other times, he looked distracted, even while standing right there, like part of him never fully came home. 3 weeks after the birth, Rebecca woke just before dawn and realized Riley wasn't beside her. The baby had finally fallen asleep on her chest an hour earlier. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the dishwasher downstairs. She found him in the kitchen, standing barefoot near the sink, scrolling through his phone. "You okay?" she whispered. Riley startled slightly. "Yeah. You been up long?" "Nah." His phone screen turned dark immediately when he lowered it. That detail sat somewhere uncomfortable inside her, not because it proved anything, because it felt unnecessary. Rebecca leaned against the doorway, holding the baby carefully against her shoulder. "You got work tomorrow?" What time?" "Early." He still wasn't looking directly at her. Then the baby stirred between them, and the moment passed. That became the pattern. Tiny moments. Nothing solid enough to grab, but enough to notice. A month later, Rebecca sat in the nursery rocker nursing the baby while checking the banking app on her phone, mostly habit. She liked knowing what bills cleared. That was when she noticed the restaurant charge, $78 at a Center City steakhouse. Tuesday night, Riley had told her he grabbed drinks with clients after work. She frowned slightly, not because of the amount, because Riley hated spending money on places like that unless somebody else was paying. When he came upstairs later carrying folded laundry, she almost asked about it. Almost. Instead, she watched him place tiny onesies into drawers with surprising gentleness. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, you look tired." She nearly laughed. "I have a newborn." "Right." He smiled weakly, but something stayed unsettled inside her. Weeks passed. Then another charge appeared. Boutique hotel bar near the airport. Then ride shares that made no geographic sense with the stories he told. One Thursday night, he came home smelling faintly unfamiliar. Not perfume exactly. Soap maybe. Hotel soap. Rebecca noticed while he kissed the baby's forehead. "You okay?" he asked, quietly. She realized she'd been staring. "Yeah." "You sure?" He hesitated. Then, "Long day." She nodded slowly. That was the thing about betrayal before confrontation. Most of it happens in silence. The betrayed person starts collecting tiny emotional splinters, while the other person keeps moving normally through the house. One night, Rebecca sat alone at the kitchen table after midnight, pumping breast milk, while Riley slept upstairs. The machine made soft mechanical sounds in the quiet room. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows again. Her phone glowed beside her hand. Bank notifications open. Receipts, times, locations, nothing definitive, not yet, but enough to make her stomach tighten. She stared toward the ceiling for a long moment, then finally opened the camera roll and took screenshots, not dramatically, not angrily, calmly, the same way she documented insurance disputes at work. Evidence first, emotions later. Upstairs, the baby began crying softly through the monitor. Rebecca stood slowly, sore and exhausted, and carried the bottles to the refrigerator before going upstairs. As she climbed the steps, she looked toward their bedroom door, closed, Riley asleep inside it, and for the first time since becoming parents, Rebecca felt something colder than fear begin settling quietly into the marriage. Attention, not suspicion fully, not yet, but the beginning of watching someone instead of trusting them. Rebecca stopped checking the account in front of Riley after that. Not consciously at first. Her body just adjusted, like muscle memory. If he walked into the room while she was looking through transactions, she'd lock the screen automatically and ask whether he wanted coffee. Small survival habits forming quietly inside the marriage. By November, the baby had started sleeping in uneven stretches. 2 good hours, if they got lucky. 3. If the universe felt generous, Rebecca functioned in fragments. Hospital shifts, pumping schedules, pediatric appointments, laundry, bills, half-finished conversations. Meanwhile, Riley moved through the house like somebody trying very hard to appear normal, sometimes overly normal, too cheerful, too quick with explanations nobody had requested. Client dinner ran long. Traffic on 76 was insane. My phone died. Rebecca noticed something strange about lies before she fully admitted to herself that's what they were. Most people volunteered too much information when they were afraid. One Wednesday evening, she stood at the stove stirring boxed macaroni while balancing the baby against her shoulder. Riley walked in 20 minutes late, carrying takeout containers. "I already made food," she said quietly. "Oh," he blinked. "Well, this place was near the office." He set the bag down anyway. The baby started fussing immediately. Riley kissed the top of her head. "You eat yet?" Rebecca looked at him. Actually looked. There was tiredness under his eyes now she didn't recognize. But not guilt exactly. Distraction. Like his attention belonged partly somewhere else, all the time. "You smell like cologne," she said. Riley froze almost invisibly, then laughed once. "I sell to clients for a living, Rebecca." She nodded slowly. "Right." That night after he fell asleep, Rebecca sat downstairs with the baby monitor beside her and opened the credit card statements again. The house creaked softly around her, heat clicking through old pipes, cars hissing down the wet street outside. She enlarged transaction details carefully. Hotel lounges, parking garages, restaurants. Some charges happened during work hours. Some didn't. One rideshare ended near Northern Liberties around midnight. Rebecca stared at the screen a long time, then finally opened a folder app on her laptop. Utilities, insurance, mortgage, baby medical. Now another folder. Statements. She downloaded PDFs one by one, not crying, not shaking, just tired. At work the next morning, Tiff caught her standing motionless beside the copier. "Girl," Rebecca blinked. "What?" "You been staring at the same paper for like 45 seconds. Rebecca forced a smile. "Didn't sleep. Baby? Life." Tiff studied her carefully. That was dangerous. Tiff noticed things. "You and Riley good?" Rebecca looked down immediately at the stack of discharge forms in her hands. "Yeah, too fast." Tiff leaned against the counter. What?" "Ain't nothing." "Then why you making that face?" "Because that's the same face women make right before they tell me some man got them out here looking stupid." Rebecca almost snapped defensively. Almost. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." Tiff's expression changed immediately. Not dramatic. Serious. "You want me to ask questions or just sit here?" Rebecca stared at the copier light sliding back and forth. "I think." She stopped. "Tried again. I think something's off." Tiff nodded once. "That ain't the same thing as crazy." The words settled deeper than Rebecca expected, because secretly, that was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Not the affair yet. Her own perception. That maybe postpartum exhaustion was twisting ordinary things into threats. That maybe she was becoming suspicious and bitter and unfair. But the receipt stayed real, no matter how tired she felt. 3 days later, Rebecca sat in her car outside the hospital after a postpartum follow-up appointment scrolling through a law firm website. Family law, property division, custody, consultations available. Rainwater slid slowly down the windshield while the baby slept in the back seat. Rebecca stared at the phone for nearly a full minute before calling. The receptionist sounded cheerful. That almost made her hang up. Instead, she scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday during her lunch break. When the call ended, she sat motionless in the driver's seat. Her wedding ring felt unusually heavy, suddenly. The lawyer's office overlooked Market Street from a building that smelled faintly like coffee and old carpet. Rebecca expected drama, coldness maybe. Instead, the attorney spoke calmly while taking notes. "Whose name is on the deed?" "Mine." "Any joint accounts?" "Yes." "Children?" "One infant daughter." The attorney nodded gently. "Do you believe marital funds were used in support of an extramarital relationship?" Rebecca hated how clinical the phrase sounded. Support of, like betrayal was an expense category. "I think so." "Okay." The attorney folded her hands. "Right now, your priority should be documentation, stability, and avoiding emotional reactions that complicate legal positioning." Positioning? Rebecca almost laughed at that too, because meanwhile, her actual life involved breast milk stains and sleeping 3 hours at a time. Still, she listened carefully. Direct deposits could be changed, separate accounts established, documentation preserved, nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just preparation. When Rebecca got home that evening, Riley was asleep on the couch with the baby on his chest. television flickering softly across the room. For a second, her heart betrayed her completely, because they looked beautiful together. Real, the kind of family she'd once prayed for. Riley stirred awake when the front door clicked shut. "You okay?" he asked sleepily. How was your appointment?" "Fine. You eat?" "Not yet." He sat up carefully so he wouldn't wake the baby. "I can heat something up." Rebecca watched him move gently through the living room carrying their daughter toward the nursery, and suddenly the grief hit harder than the anger ever had. Because this was the part nobody talked about, how betrayal sometimes arrived while the other person was still capable of tenderness, how somebody could still look like home while slowly becoming dangerous to your peace. That night after Riley fell asleep upstairs, Rebecca changed her direct deposit information at the kitchen table while the dishwasher hummed beside her. Then she texted her mother, "If I needed somewhere temporary for a while, would that be okay?" The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "Baby, you never have to ask me that." By the time Riley texted Kiara that Friday afternoon, Rebecca had already packed half the nursery, not emotionally, practically, diapers separated into grocery bags, baby clothes folded by size, bottles wrapped carefully in dish towels so they wouldn't crack during transport. The baby slept in short, restless stretches beside her, while cardboard boxes crowded the hallway downstairs. Outside, Southwest Philadelphia moved through late afternoon traffic, like always. School buses, corner stores, music leaking faintly from passing cars. Nobody looking at the little brick house where a marriage was quietly ending room by room. Upstairs, Rebecca sat cross-legged on the nursery floor with her laptop open beside her. Email confirmation. Settlement finalized. Funds processing. Keys transferred at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Everything had already happened except Riley finding out. The baby stirred softly in the bassinet. Rebecca reached down automatically, rubbing tiny circles against her stomach until she settled again. Then her phone buzzed. "Riley, client dinner tonight. Don't wait up." Rebecca stared at the message. No anger came anymore. That part frightened her most. 3 months earlier, she would have cried reading it. Now she just opened her screenshot folder and added another timestamp. Downstairs the dryer buzzed. Life continuing. Meanwhile, across the city, Riley sat inside a hotel bar near the airport, convincing himself he deserved one uncomplicated night. That was the lie he kept choosing. Not that he didn't love Rebecca. He did. The more dangerous lie was that love somehow canceled out betrayal. Kiara slid into the booth across from him, wearing a dark coat, still damp from the rain. "You look stressed," she said immediately. Riley smirked tiredly. "Good to know I'm hiding it well." She laughed softly. The waitress came by. Drinks ordered, music low overhead, televisions playing sports. Nobody was really watching. For the first 20 minutes, Riley managed to stay inside the version of himself he preferred. Funny, desired, untouched by consequence. He talked about work, complained about clients, made Kiara laugh twice hard enough to lean into his shoulder. That feeling, the temporary relief of becoming somebody else for a few hours, had started mattering to him more than he admitted, because at home, everything reminded him of failure lately. The clinic, the baby crying, the exhaustion in Rebecca's eyes, the quiet pressure of not feeling like enough. With Kiara, none of that existed unless he mentioned it, so he stopped mentioning it. "You zoned out again," Kiara said finally. You keep doing that." "Sorry. You want to be here?" The question irritated him unfairly. "I'm literally here. That's not what I asked." Riley took a sip of whiskey. "You ever feel like people only see you for what you can't fix?" Kiara tilted her head slightly. "That sounds specific." He laughed under his breath. "Forget it." But even saying it, he thought of Rebecca downstairs in that house probably feeding the baby alone again. Guilt flickered briefly. Then he buried it the same way he always did. More drinks, more distraction. By 11:30, they were upstairs in the hotel room. City lights blurred beyond the curtains. Kiara stood in the bathroom removing earrings while Riley sat on the edge of the bed checking his phone. 2 unread messages from Rebecca. 1 pediatric portal notification. A low balance alert. He locked the screen immediately. "You hiding from somebody?" Kiara asked lightly. "Nah." But his chest tightened anyway. Later, lying beside Kiara in the dark while traffic murmured faintly below the hotel windows, Riley stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Kiara rested against his shoulder, half awake. "You okay?" She mumbled. "Yeah, you don't sound yeah." Riley closed his eyes. "I just need things to calm down for a minute." He meant the marriage, the money, the pressure, the version of himself constantly falling short. Kiara kissed his shoulder absent-mindedly. "They will." That was the difference between them. Riley heard temporary comfort and mistook it for understanding. Meanwhile, back at the house, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table feeding the baby at 2:15 in the morning while signing final documents electronically. The room smelled faintly like formula and cardboard. Half the cabinets were already empty. Family pictures removed from walls. The silence inside the house no longer hurt her. That stage had passed. Mrs. Elaine had come earlier with extra storage bins and frozen casserole dishes. Tiff stopped by too, carrying coffee and refusing to say "I told you so" out loud, even though the sentence practically hovered around her head. Now everyone was gone, just Rebecca and the baby beneath dim kitchen light. She looked around the room slowly. The first house she'd ever owned. The house her grandmother once walked through, touching walls proudly, like they were living things. The place where she thought love would become permanent, if she worked hard enough at it. Her phone buzzed once. Riley again. No message. Just location sharing accidentally triggered for a second, before disappearing. Airport Marriott. Rebecca stared at the screen, then quietly turned the phone face down beside her. No tears came. That part was over too. Around 4:40 in the morning, movers carried the last boxes out, while dawn slowly lightened the street outside. The baby slept against Rebecca's chest in a wrap carrier while she signed final paperwork near the front door. One of the movers glanced around the empty living room. "Y'all just renovated too," he said casually. Rebecca looked at the pale squares where furniture used to sit. "Yeah," she answered softly. Then she handed over the keys, not angrily, not dramatically, just steadily, like someone finally accepting that surviving something and staying inside it were not the same thing. An hour later, while Riley slept beside another woman believing his marriage was wounded but still standing, Rebecca drove away from the house with her daughter in the back seat and a folder full of legal documents beside her. Two people, same night, completely different understandings of what was ending. The first week after Rebecca left, Riley still talked like the marriage could be argued back into place. That was the dangerous stage. Not acceptance, not grief, negotiation mixed with ego. He kept telling himself she was overreacting, that women left to be chased, that once she calmed down and saw how miserable he was, she'd answer the phone and they'd start untangling things. But every day made him look smaller instead. The attorney's office emailed him twice requesting communication remain limited to custody and financial matters. Rebecca still never responded directly, not once. That silence started eating through him. By Tuesday, he was staying in a residence inn near the airport because his cards kept failing at nicer places. The room smelled faintly like microwave popcorn and industrial detergent. He sat on the edge of the bed at 1 in the morning, scrolling through old pictures of the baby, while ESPN muttered quietly in the background. Then he called Rebecca again. Voicemail. He waited through the beep, breathing too hard already. "You really doing this?" Silence. "I'm serious, Rebecca." His voice sharpened. "You took my daughter and disappeared like I'm some random dude off the street." He stood up, pacing now. "You don't get to just shut me out." The room suddenly felt tiny. Carpet pattern, suitcase half zipped open, takeout containers on the desk. His whole life reduced to temporary furniture. "You know what?" he snapped finally. "Call me back before lawyers make this uglier than it gotta be." He hung up, breathing hard. 10 minutes later, he called again. This time, softer. "Look, I'm sorry, all right?" He rubbed his eyes with one hand. "I know I messed up." Pause. "But this whole thing? Selling the house, keeping the baby from me? That's crazy." Even now, he still framed himself as reacting to her instead of causing her. That was the problem. Riley understood consequences emotionally, only after they landed on him personally. The next morning, Rebecca sat inside her mother's dining room feeding the baby, while her phone buzzed silently beside a cup of untouched coffee. Miss Elaine glanced toward it. "You gon' listen to that?" "No." The voicemail notification disappeared after a moment. Another one arrived 30 minutes later, then another. Rebecca looked exhausted, hair wrapped loosely, oversized t-shirt, one sock on because she'd forgotten the other halfway upstairs. But emotionally, she looked different now, not lighter, more focused. That scared Miss Elaine more than tears would have. "You saving all of it?" she asked quietly. Rebecca nodded once. Miss Elaine stirred sugar into her coffee slowly. "Baby." Rebecca looked up. "You do understand guilty men get loud before they get honest sometimes." The sentence sat heavy in the room. Upstairs, the baby started crying softly through the monitor. Rebecca stood immediately. Automatic. By Thursday, Riley's humiliation had started leaking online, not directly, cowardly sideways. Instagram stories about disloyal people, tweets about women using kids as weapons, quotes about betrayal and respect, and men being unappreciated. Nothing specific enough for strangers to understand, specific enough for mutual friends to. Tiff sent screenshots immediately. Rebecca stared at one while rocking the baby in the guest room. Crazy how people forget who held things down when life got hard. Underneath it, from some guy Riley barely even liked in real life. Tiff texted again. He's spiraling. Rebecca locked the phone without answering, not because it didn't hurt, because humiliation had started changing shape now. At first, Riley wanted forgiveness. Now, he wanted witnesses. One afternoon, he cornered an old mutual friend outside a Wawa near Upper Darby after spotting her by accident. "She talking to you?" he asked immediately. The woman hesitated. "Riley." "Nah, just answer me. She okay? Where's she at?" "I'm not doing this." Riley laughed sharply. "So everybody just picking sides now?" People walking past glanced over briefly. The woman lowered her voice. "You need to calm down." That sentence nearly detonated him, because nothing enraged ashamed men faster than being treated like they were dangerous. "I am calm. You not acting calm. She took my kid." The woman stepped back slightly. Tiny movement, but Riley noticed it. And for half a second he hated her for looking at him that way, like somebody unpredictable. That night, he left another voicemail. Longer, this time, voice rough from drinking. "You think your family gonna protect you from everything?" Silence crackled through the message. "You got everybody acting like I'm some monster." He laughed again. Uglier now. "You ain't innocent either, Rebecca." The second the voicemail ended, regret flickered through him. Not because he frightened her, because he sounded weak. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat inside a legal aid office downtown the next morning, listening carefully, while an advocate explained documentation procedures, threatening communication, repeated contact, escalation patterns. The advocate spoke calmly, professionally, like none of this was unusual. That reality unsettled Rebecca deeply. "How serious is this?" she asked quietly. The woman folded her hands. "Right now, it's concerning behavior." Rebecca looked down at printed screenshots spread across the table. Threats disguised as hurt feelings. Control disguised as panic. "You think he'd hurt me?" The advocate paused carefully before answering. "I think men who feel their identity collapsing sometimes stop recognizing where emotional pressure becomes intimidation." Outside, Market Street traffic moved loudly through late afternoon. People carrying groceries, students laughing, buses groaning past in dirty winter slush. Ordinary city life continuing while Rebecca stared at paperwork, proving the man she once trusted most no longer understood how frightening he had started to sound. That night, after everybody went to bed, she sat alone in the guest room beside the baby's portable crib and replayed one voicemail through headphones. Riley's breathing, his anger, the desperation underneath it. And for the first time since leaving, Rebecca understood something painful with absolute clarity. Riley still believed this story was about what she had done to him, which meant he still had not fully understood what he had become. Riley realized how alone he was on a Saturday afternoon outside Rebecca's mother's church. He hadn't planned to go there. That was what he told himself anyway. He'd been driving around to clear his head, which somehow meant crossing half the city and ending up parked across from a brick church with stained glass windows and a basement door propped open by a cinder block. Cars lined both sides of the street. People were carrying foil trays inside. Some kind of church meeting, or repast, or baby pantry donation drive. Riley didn't know. That was part of the problem. Rebecca had belonged to whole rooms he could barely identify. He sat in his car watching women in long coats hug each other on the sidewalk, Somebody helped an elderly man up the steps. A teenager carried 2 cases of water through the basement entrance while laughing at something somebody said behind him. Then, he saw Tiff. She came out carrying an empty aluminum pan, talking to Miss Elaine. Riley's hand tightened around the steering wheel. A minute later, Rebecca stepped into view. Not alone. That was the first thing he noticed. Never alone. The baby was strapped to her chest in a carrier, tiny hat pulled low, while Miss Elaine adjusted the blanket around her feet like it was sacred work. Rebecca looked tired, but not lost. That bothered him in a way he didn't want to name. He had pictured her broken somewhere, crying, confused, maybe regretting it. Instead, she was standing in winter sunlight beside people who moved around her naturally, like a wall forming without anyone announcing it. Riley got out of the car before he could talk himself out of it. Tiff saw him first. Her face changed immediately. Not fear, warning. "Rebecca," she said quietly. Rebecca turned. For 1 second, nothing moved between them except traffic. Riley walked closer with both hands visible, like that made him reasonable. "I just want to talk." Miss Elaine stepped slightly in front of Rebecca, not dramatically, just enough. "Not here," she said. Riley looked at her. "With respect, Miss Elaine, this is between me and my wife." Rebecca's face barely moved at the word wife. That stung. Tiff set the aluminum pan down on the church steps. "You need to leave." Riley laughed once. "Of course you got something to say." Tiff's eyes narrowed. "I got a lot to say." "I'm choosing peace." "Riley," Rebecca said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. He looked at her immediately. The baby shifted against her chest. Something in him softened and sharpened at the same time. "I need to see her," he said. Rebecca adjusted one hand behind the baby's back. "Through counsel?" "That's insane." "That's where we are." "No, that's where you put us." A few people near the church door had stopped pretending not to watch. Riley noticed. The shame hit, and because he had nowhere to put it, it came out as anger. "You got all these people acting like I'm dangerous." Rebecca held his stare. "You came to my mother's church uninvited, after I asked you not to contact me directly. I'm trying to see my child. You're trying to get around boundaries." The sentence landed too cleanly. He hated it, because it sounded like something from the advocate or the lawyer, not from the woman who used to argue with him over cabinet paint. Miss Elaine spoke again. "You need to go before this becomes something else." Riley looked past her toward Rebecca. "Say, that's what you want." Rebecca blinked once. "What?" "Say you want me gone." "Not them. You." The baby made a small, restless sound. Rebecca looked down immediately, her whole body changing in response. That tiny movement told Riley something brutal. The baby had become her first instinct now. Not him. Maybe it should have always been obvious, but standing there in front of a church basement door, he felt replaced by a responsibility he had helped create and then failed to protect. Rebecca lifted her eyes again. "I want you to leave." No screaming, no shaking, just words. Riley's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Behind Rebecca, people kept watching. Not strangers exactly. That was worse. People who knew her, people who knew enough. A cousin he vaguely recognized from the cookout years ago stood near the entrance holding a stack of paper plates, staring at him like he was a mess somebody might need to clean up. Riley stepped back. One step, then another. "Fine," he said, but it came out thin, not powerful. He walked back to his car with every nerve in his body burning. Nobody followed. Nobody had to. As he drove off, he glanced once in the rearview mirror and saw Tiff usher Rebecca inside, while Miss Elaine stayed outside watching until his car turned the corner. That image stayed with him, not because it was dramatic, because it showed him something he had never fully understood. Rebecca had roots, not just relatives, roots. People who remembered her before him, people who would still feed her after him, people who could tell when her voice sounded wrong over the phone, people who knew which forms to print, which cousin to call, which church member had gone through something similar, which spare room had enough space for a portable crib. Riley had work contacts, client numbers, bar acquaintances, a mistress who stopped answering quickly when his life became inconvenient. He drove aimlessly until he ended up near the river, parked facing gray water under a dirty sky. His phone sat silent in the cup holder. For once, nobody was calling him. That silence felt different from the empty house. The empty house had shocked him. This silence exposed him, because without Rebecca managing the center, he had no center at all. Just a man in a parked car, wearing yesterday's shirt, realizing the life he thought was his had always been held together by people he never thought to thank. The donor records arrived on a rainy Wednesday. Riley almost didn't open the email. By then, legal communication had become its own kind of torture. PDFs, deadlines, clinical language, reducing entire years of marriage into bullet points and disclosures. He sat alone inside the residence inn-room, wearing gym shorts and an old Eagles hoodie, while rain crawled down the window beside the air conditioning unit. The room smelled stale, like reheated food and damp carpet. His attorney had requested expanded fertility documentation after Riley kept insisting something about the timeline didn't add up. At first, it was anger driving him, a desperate need to find something, anything, something that proved Rebecca had betrayed him first. Now, staring at the attachment notification, he suddenly felt afraid to know. Still, he clicked. Consent forms, clinic notes, lab summaries, medical terminology he barely understood. Riley skimmed impatiently at first, then slower, then completely still. Severe male factor. Infertility. Azoospermia suspected. Further confirmation recommended. 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 The same phrase repeated across multiple reports. Dates from years earlier. He frowned hard. No, that didn't make sense. Because if they knew all this... His eyes moved lower. Unread portal notifications attached in the discovery packet. Missed follow-ups. Messages marked open by Rebecca, not opened by patient. Patient, meaning him. Riley stared at the screen, while something cold spread through his chest. There it was, months of information he never fully read. Messages he ignored. Appointments he postponed. Words he emotionally translated into, "You are less of a man." His breathing changed. Shallow now. He scrolled farther. Then he saw the donor paperwork. Signed consent acknowledgments. Clinical timing. Treatment documentation. Rebecca's name. His own signature near the bottom of one form. Riley blinked hard. He barely remembered signing it. That realization hurt, almost worse than the records themselves. Because it meant Rebecca hadn't tricked him in one dramatic moment. He had disappeared slowly while she carried the reality for both of them. Still, another document stopped him cold. Patient demonstrates emotional avoidance regarding fertility diagnosis. Recommended continued counseling prior to assisted reproduction. Riley rubbed one hand over his mouth. Then finally the thought came fully formed. The baby wasn't biologically his. The room suddenly felt airless. He stood up too quickly, knocking over the takeout container on the desk. Sauce spilled onto the carpet unnoticed. "No," he whispered, not because he didn't understand the records, because he finally did. His phone rang unexpectedly. His attorney. Riley answered immediately. "What the hell is this?" Silence crackled briefly on the line. "The records confirm donor conception occurred through documented clinical procedures," the attorney said carefully. "You telling me she had another man's kid and never told me?" "That's not exactly..." "She lied to me." The attorney paused. "Riley, according to the records, there were discussions regarding donor pathways." "Discussions?" Riley snapped. "I was drowning, and she just..." He stopped himself suddenly, because another memory surfaced hard enough to interrupt his anger. The parking garage outside the clinic. Rebecca, holding his hand. "If that's what gets us a family, then okay." At the time he'd barely listened to himself say it. He remembered that now, and the memory sickened him. The attorney's voice lowered slightly. "You need to understand something carefully before reacting emotionally. Legally and relationally, these situations are often more complicated than clients initially feel." "Clients..." Riley hung up before she finished. For nearly 10 minutes, he just stood there breathing hard beside the overturned takeout container. Then he called Rebecca. Straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. Third time. She answered. Not warm, not cold either. Just exhausted. "What?" Riley closed his eyes instantly at the sound of her voice. "What the fuck is this?" Silence. "You really let me raise somebody else's child." The sentence came out uglier than he intended. Instantly. On the other end, he heard the baby fuss faintly somewhere nearby. Then Rebecca spoke quietly. You want the truth, or you want somebody to punish? You lied to me. I protected you. That's not protection." His voice cracked hard enough to embarrass him. Rain battered the hotel window. Riley paced blindly. "You sat there and watched me love that baby knowing. I sat there and watched you disappear every time the doctors tried telling you the truth." That stopped him. Completely. Silence stretched. Then Rebecca inhaled shakily. "You think I wanted that?" she asked softly. "You think any part of that felt simple to me?" Riley pressed one hand against his forehead. "You should have told me." "Yes." The immediate honesty stunned him. No excuses. No manipulation. Just yes. Rebecca's voice sounded tired enough to collapse. "I should have told you sooner." The baby cried louder briefly. Riley heard Rebecca shifting, probably lifting her automatically. Domestic sounds. Tiny ones. And somehow, that made everything worse. "I kept waiting for you to stay emotionally present long enough to hear it," she said quietly. "Every appointment felt like watching you disappear further inside yourself. You made the choice without me." "No," she whispered. "I made the choice after you stopped choosing with me." Riley leaned against the wall, heavily. The room blurred slightly, because the terrible thing was, both of them were telling the truth. Different truths, but truth anyway. He remembered all the appointments he mentally checked out of, all the forms he signed without reading, all the nights he escaped into work, distractions, affairs, noise. Meanwhile, Rebecca had carried the shame physically, emotionally, medically, alone. "I loved you," she said suddenly. Past tense. Riley shut his eyes harder. "And I know that sounds crazy after everything now, but I did." The hotel room felt unbearably quiet. "You were supposed to trust me," he said finally. Rebecca laughed once, soft, broken. "I trusted you enough to believe love would make you stay." That sentence hit harder than the donor revelation itself, because suddenly the affair, the empty house, the legal documents, all of it rearranged around a simpler truth. Rebecca had not hidden the donor conception because she wanted to betray him. She hid it because somewhere along the way she stopped believing he could survive feeling ashamed without destroying something around him. The baby settled again on the other end of the line. Riley listened to the tiny sounds quietly, then asked the question that had really been underneath everything all along. "So what am I to her?" Long silence. Finally Rebecca answered. "That depended on you long before biology did." Neither spoke after that. And for the first time since the marriage started collapsing, Riley felt something worse than anger finally settling into him. Recognition, not of one bad night, not even of one affair, but of years spent slowly abandoning people while still insisting he loved them. The first custody conference lasted 28 minutes. Riley knew because he watched the clock the whole time, not because he was bored, because looking at the clock was easier than looking at Rebecca. They sat in a small conference room downtown, with beige walls, a round table, and a box of tissues placed too deliberately in the center. Everything smelled faintly like coffee, printer toner, and somebody's winter coat drying in the corner. Rebecca sat across from him, with the baby carrier beside her chair. The baby was not in it. That detail bothered him before anything else did. He had pictured seeing her, hearing her, maybe catching one small accidental moment where Rebecca softened because the baby reached for him. But Rebecca had not brought her, only the empty carrier. Practical. A reminder without the comfort. Her attorney sat beside her. Riley's attorney sat beside him. Nobody raised their voice. That made it worse. The whole room spoke in calm sentences about the ruins of his life. Temporary custody schedule. Supervised transition. Communication through parenting app only. No direct contact outside child-related logistics. Financial disclosures due by Friday. Documentation regarding dissipated marital funds. Riley kept hearing words that sounded too clean for what they meant. Transition, disclosure, temporary, marital funds. He wanted somebody to say what it really was. You broke your house, and now everybody gets paperwork. At one point, his attorney slid a proposed schedule in front of him. 2 short visits a week at a family services center until further review. Riley stared at the page. "This is ridiculous," he said quietly. His attorney touched his sleeve under the table. "Not now." Rebecca looked down at her hands. Still no ring. He hated that too. Not because he still had the right to it, because the absence looked natural on her now, like her hand had adjusted before he did. "You okay with this?" Riley asked her. The attorney beside Rebecca shifted slightly. Rebecca lifted her eyes. No, she said. The answer surprised him. There was no satisfaction in her face. No victory. I'm not okay with any of this. Then she looked back down. That was the most they spoke directly during the conference. Afterward, outside the building, Riley stood near the curb while people hurried past with briefcases and coffees. Philadelphia moved around him like a city uninterested in personal collapse. Rebecca came out a few minutes later, not alone. Her attorney was beside her. Miss Elaine waited by the curb in the silver Buick, hazards blinking. Riley wanted to say something, anything, but the rules from the conference already sat between them like glass. Rebecca saw him, held his eyes for half a second, then got into her mother's car. No performance, no punishment, just leaving again. The weeks after that became a series of rooms Riley did not belong in. Residence inn, rental office, attorney waiting room, family services center with plastic toys wiped down too often, and murals of cartoon animals painted on the wall. The first time he saw the baby there, she stared at him like he was a familiar sound she couldn't place. That nearly undid him. A staff worker sat nearby, pretending not to observe too closely. Riley held the baby awkwardly at first, then tighter once she settled. "Hey," he whispered. His voice broke on the smallest word. "Hey, little girl." She grabbed at the strings of his hoodie. He laughed softly, and for about 3 seconds something inside him felt alive again. Then she started crying, not dramatically. Just that small, confused baby cry that meant hunger or tiredness or wrong smell or too much fluorescent light. Riley bounced her gently. "It's okay, it's okay." But she cried harder. The staff worker stood. "She may need a minute." "I got it." His voice came out too sharp. The worker paused. Riley heard himself, softened immediately. "Sorry, Sorry." He handed the baby over because the rules said he had to follow guidance, because everything now had rules. Later, he sat in his car outside the center with his hands on the steering wheel and cried without making much sound. That was new. Quiet crying. No anger attached to it. Just grief with nowhere useful to go. Financially, the consequences arrived slower but heavier. Statements reviewed. Credit lines frozen. Joint obligations separated. His attorney explaining, with visible patience, that money spent on Kiara could matter. Hotel charges, restaurant receipts, boutique gifts, ride shares, everything he had once justified as private now appeared in spreadsheets. His affair had become math. At work, things changed too. Not officially at first, but people noticed when his sales numbers dipped, when he missed morning calls, when he snapped at a warehouse coordinator over a delayed invoice. His manager asked him into a glass-walled office one Friday afternoon. "You all right, man?" Riley almost lied. The old answer rose automatically. "Yeah, just busy." Instead, he looked through the glass at coworkers moving around with laptops and lunch bags, and lives that still seemed intact. "No," he said. The manager nodded slowly, uncomfortable already. "Take the weekend." As if a weekend could hold it. Kiara stopped calling by the end of the month. There wasn't even a dramatic ending, just fewer texts, shorter replies, then nothing. Riley saw one of her posts later from a rooftop bar, smiling beside people he didn't know. He stared at it longer than he should have, then deleted the app from his phone, not because he was healed, because humiliation had become exhausting. By early spring, he moved into a furnished studio near the airport with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. The bed folded out from a gray couch. The kitchen had 2 cabinets. The refrigerator made a clicking noise at night. He bought diapers for visits and kept them stacked beside paper towels, like supplies for a life he was allowed to enter only by appointment. Sometimes after work, he would sit at the small table eating grocery store rotisserie chicken from the container and realize he had no one to tell ordinary things to. A difficult client, a parking ticket, a funny billboard on I-95, the kind of details that had once gone automatically to Rebecca. That was the part nobody warned him about, not losing the big things, the house, the marriage, the version of fatherhood he thought he had, but losing the small witness, the person who knew how you took your coffee, which ankle cracked in the morning, what tone meant you were lying about being fine. One night, After a supervised visit where the baby fell asleep against his chest for almost 15 minutes, Riley returned to the studio and stood in the doorway without turning on the light. The room looked exactly as he'd left it, untouched, unneeded, no bottle in the sink, no baby blanket over the chair, no Rebecca moving through the kitchen pretending not to be tired, just quiet appliances and rental furniture. For the first time, Riley understood that consequences were not one dramatic punishment. They were ordinary. They were waking up inside a life where nobody expected you home. The final conversation happened outside a community legal center 3 blocks from City Hall, not in a courtroom, not during some dramatic rainstorm, just late afternoon traffic, dirty spring wind, and people smoking near the entrance while buses groaned past on Broad Street. Riley almost missed Rebecca at first because she looked smaller than he remembered, not weaker, just tired in a way that had settled into her posture permanently. She stood near the curb adjusting the baby bag on her shoulder while Miss Elaine waited inside the car nearby. The baby was asleep in the back seat. Riley noticed the tiny socks first through the window, yellow, one halfway kicked off. For a second, something painful and ordinary hit him so hard, he forgot what he planned to say. Rebecca saw him walking over and immediately straightened slightly, guarded, not frightened. That difference mattered. "You got a minute?" he asked. Rebecca glanced toward her mother's car, then back at him. 1 minute. Riley nodded. Traffic hissed through puddles nearby. Somebody across the street argued loudly about parking, normal city noise, the kind that made emotional moments feel strangely exposed. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Riley laughed softly under his breath. "You know what's messed up?" Rebecca looked tired already. "What?" "I still keep thinking, if I explain myself correctly, somehow this all changes." Her expression flickered slightly, not softening, just recognition. "Riley, I know." He rubbed both hands over his face quickly. "I know it don't." A bus roared past between them and the street. Rebecca shifted the diaper bag higher on her shoulder. Riley noticed she still carried everything like she expected no one else would. That realization hurt more now than it used to. He looked down at the sidewalk for a second, then finally asked the question that had been sitting inside him for months. Was any of it real? Rebecca's face changed immediately. Not anger, something sadder. She leaned back lightly against the hood of the parked car behind her. "Why would you ask me that?" Riley laughed once, because how could she not know? "You sold the house, Rebecca. You cheated on me. I know that." "No," she said quietly. "You know it now. That's different." The words landed cleanly. Riley looked away toward traffic. "You loved me enough to marry me," he said. Then suddenly I'm standing in an empty house. Rebecca's jaw tightened slightly. "Suddenly for you." That shut him up, because there it was again. The same truth he kept trying to outrun. Nothing about the ending had been sudden except his awareness of it. A long silence stretched. Then Rebecca exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said. Riley looked at her. "Yes, what?" "Yes, it was real. No hesitation, no performance. That's why it hurt so bad." Wind pushed loose hair across her face. She tucked it back automatically. "I loved you when we met," she continued quietly. "I loved you in that tiny apartment with the broken radiator. I loved you painting those ugly kitchen cabinets wrong the first time." Riley almost smiled despite himself. "Almost. I loved you when you held my grandmother's folding chairs for 6 straight hours after the funeral, because nobody asked you to leave." Her voice wavered slightly there. "I loved you when you cried holding the baby." The baby shifted faintly inside the car behind them. Both of them glanced instinctively toward the sound, then back at each other. "So what happened?" Riley asked finally. Rebecca looked at him a long time before answering. "You stopped letting me matter more than your shame." The sentence settled between them heavily. Riley opened his mouth, closed it again, because he knew exactly what she meant. Not just the affair. Before that, the clinic, the silence, the disappearing. Rebecca folded her arms against the cold. "You think cheating was the first time you left me alone?" she asked softly. Riley looked down immediately. Cars moved through the intersection nearby. Somebody laughed loudly outside the deli on the corner. The world continuing while his marriage quietly autopsied itself on a sidewalk. "I was drowning too," he said finally. "I know. You act like I wanted to feel like that. I don't think you wanted it. Rebecca's voice softened for the first time. I think you kept choosing easier ways not to feel it. That one hurt because it was true in ways he still couldn't fully explain. Kiara, work, avoidance, anger. Even the affair itself had mostly been escape disguised as desire. Riley leaned against the parking meter beside him, suddenly exhausted. So what now? Rebecca's expression shifted again. That question sounded different coming from him now, less demanding, more lost. Now we raise her the best we can, she said quietly. Together hung unspoken between them, not romantically, functionally, painfully. Riley swallowed hard. You ever think we could have survived it if I'd... He stopped. If you'd what? Been honest sooner. Rebecca stared toward traffic for a long moment, then shook her head slightly. No. The answer surprised him. She looked back at him. I think maybe we could have survived the infertility. Her voice grew thinner there. Maybe even the donor truth, eventually. Riley's chest tightened. But not the contempt. Silence. Because that was the word underneath everything neither of them had said out loud until now. Contempt. The eye rolls. The disappearing. The selfishness. The exhaustion of carrying someone emotionally while they insisted they were still standing beside you. Miss Elaine honked lightly from inside the car, not impatient. Just time. Rebecca pushed away from the parked car. I gotta go. Riley nodded automatically. Then, before she turned away, I did love you, he said quietly. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, like the sentence physically hurt to hear. I know, she answered. And somehow that was worse than if she'd denied it. Because there was no dramatic villain standing in front of him, just two exhausted people who once built a real life together and slowly failed each other in different ways until love finally collapsed under the weight of what neither of them could carry anymore. Rebecca opened the passenger door and climbed into the car beside her sleeping daughter. Riley stood on the sidewalk watching the Buick pull into traffic. No screaming, no cinematic goodbye, just another Philadelphia evening swallowing a family that no longer knew how to stay one thing. By June, Rebecca had stopped waking up every time her phone buzzed. That was how she knew healing had started. Not dramatically, not beautifully, just her nervous system finally understanding that every sound in the night was no longer danger. The apartment she rented sat above a hair salon in West Philadelphia, 3 blocks from her mother, and close enough to Tiff that surprise visits happened regularly. It was smaller than the house. Smaller kitchen, smaller bathroom, no backyard. The floors creaked near the windows, and the radiator clanged loud enough to scare the baby the first week. Still, the air inside felt softer somehow. Lived in, safe. Baby toys covered almost every surface now. A plastic giraffe near the couch. Tiny socks draped over the armchair. Half-folded laundry waiting on the dining table beside unopened mail, and a cold cup of coffee Rebecca kept forgetting to finish. Real life, not fixed life. That distinction mattered. One Saturday morning, Rebecca stood barefoot in the kitchen spooning oatmeal into a bowl, while the baby smacked both hands against the high-chair tray impatiently. Okay, she murmured tiredly. You act like I never feed you. The baby squealed loudly. Miss Elaine laughed from the living room. She got your attitude already. That's unfortunate for everybody. Tiff snorted from the couch without looking up from her phone. Especially her future little boyfriend. Absolutely not. Everybody laughed quietly. The moment passed small and ordinary. But months earlier, Rebecca had honestly believed she might never feel ordinary again. That was the thing about surviving betrayal. Movies taught people healing looked dramatic. In reality, healing often looked like grocery lists, exhaustion, and finally being able to sit still without replaying old conversations in your head. Across the city, Riley learned silence had texture. His studio apartment stayed painfully neat now because there was nobody else inside it to interrupt routines. He folded blankets, washed dishes immediately, kept the diaper bag packed near the door for visits. Sometimes he caught himself buying groceries like Rebecca still lived there. 2 yogurts instead of 1. Family-sized juice. Then standing in the checkout line realizing nobody was coming over, the supervised visits eventually became unsupervised daytime visits. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt fragile. Like trust on crutches. One afternoon, the baby fell asleep on his chest while cartoons played softly in the background of the apartment. Riley sat frozen beneath her. Didn't reach for his phone. didn't move, just listened to her breathing, tiny warm weight against his ribs. For a moment, peace entered the room so suddenly it almost frightened him. Then came grief right behind it, because he understood now what Rebecca meant. Fatherhood had never been biology alone. It had been presence, patience, consistency, the things he kept abandoning whenever shame made him uncomfortable. The baby stirred slightly. Riley looked down at her tiny fingers curled against his shirt. "I'm trying," he whispered, not to Rebecca, to himself. Some nights he still drove past the old house, not often, just when work ran late and loneliness felt too loud inside the apartment. New people lived there now, different curtains, different car parked outside. One evening, he watched a stranger carry groceries up the same front steps where Rebecca once stood laughing at him for dropping paint rollers all over the porch. The man unlocked the door casually, like it had always belonged to him. Riley drove away before the feeling in his chest fully formed. Back at the apartment, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table one humid night after everybody left. The baby finally asleep, sink full of dishes, bills spread beside her laptop, open enrollment paperwork from the hospital waiting for signatures. Through the open window came city sounds, sirens, music somewhere distant, somebody arguing about parking, Philadelphia breathing outside her walls. She leaned back in the chair slowly, tired still. That part never fully disappeared. Single motherhood wasn't inspiring most days. It was logistics, planning, constant motion, but the fear had loosened its grip. That mattered. Her phone buzzed softly. A message through the parenting app. From Riley. She liked the peaches today. Rebecca stared at it a second. Simple. No manipulation. No hidden bitterness. Just information about the baby. For the first time in months, replying did not feel emotionally dangerous. She always does. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, she laughed when the dog barked outside. Rebecca smiled before she could stop herself. Tiny involuntary thing. Human, she typed back. She laughs at everything right now. Another pause, then nothing else. And somehow the restraint itself felt important. No reaching backward. No pretending they could return to what they were. Just 2 damaged people slowly learning how to stand near the same child without reopening every wound each time. Later that night, Rebecca walked into the baby's room, holding a basket of unfolded clothes. Moonlight cut softly across the floor. The baby slept sprawled sideways in the crib. One sock missing again. Rebecca stood there quietly for a long moment, thinking, not about revenge, not even about Riley exactly, just the strange way life keeps moving after something destroys the version you imagined. She had once believed losing her marriage would feel like dying publicly. Instead, it felt quieter than that, more exhausting, more ordinary, and somehow more survivable. Across the city, Riley sat alone at his kitchen table, holding an old photograph he found while unpacking another box. The picture showed Rebecca standing in the half-painted kitchen years earlier, with blue paint on her cheek, laughing at something outside the frame. He remembered taking it, remembered thinking in that exact moment that he had finally built something permanent. Riley looked around the silent apartment. Folded stroller by the wall, empty high chair, one tiny sock accidentally left behind after visitation. That sock broke him more than the legal paperwork ever did, because it proved something devastatingly simple. A child had existed inside his life long enough to leave traces behind, and he had nearly missed the entire meaning of it while protecting his pride. Riley sat there a long time holding the photograph, while traffic moved faintly outside the window. No dramatic revelation came, no sudden redemption, just clarity arriving slowly and too late. He did not lose Rebecca in one night. He lost her in every small moment he chose. Ego over honesty, escape over presence, shame over love. By the time he noticed the marriage collapsing, she had already been carrying the weight alone for years. If this story hit you emotionally, take a second and really think about why. Because a lot of relationships don't end with one explosive moment. Sometimes people leave slowly while still sleeping beside each other every night. Sometimes the real damage starts long before the cheating, long before the yelling, long before the papers get signed. And sometimes the person you think will never walk away has already been grieving the relationship in silence for months. If you made it this far, comment the word inches below, because that's how most people lose the things they love. Not all at once, just little by little until one day there's nothing left to save. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Mr. Kingswell Stories for more real, emotionally powerful stories about love, betrayal, family, regret, and the consequences people never see coming until it's too late. I'll see you in the next story.